President.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to have 15 minutes to speak. Oh,
Senator, to stand for the quorum call.
First, to lift the quorum call.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to have up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Madam President, I rise today to speak in support of the Thune Amendment, which I co-sponsored and would put the brakes on the TARP train wreck. TARP was originally conceived to purchase toxic assets from banks in order to clean up their balance sheets and provide them the capability and liquidity to begin lending again. At the time, Federal Reserve Bank Chairman Ben Bernanke said that we were facing the most severe financial crisis in the post-World War II era. President Bush stated that the unprecedented challenges of such a financial crisis required unprecedented response. Without action, the American people would face massive job losses, significant erosion in the value of retirement accounts and home values, and a lack of credit available. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson said that unless Congress took action, the financial system of our nation and the world would collapse in short order. My constituents said at the time they couldn't get loans to keep their businesses up and running. Something needed to be done. Secretary Paulson proposed an emergency plan to authorize as much as $700 billion to purchase toxic assets, such as devalued mortgage securities, from the financial institutions holding them. It was stated that the plan would restore consumer confidence in the economy, as the Treasury would show faith in our financial system by purchasing these assets, managing them while the market stabilized, and selling them later. The proceeds from the sale of these assets would then go to pay down our national debt. In response, Congress proposed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, which created the Troubled Asset Relief Program called TARP, and authorized not $700 billion, but $350 billion in federal assistance. The Republican and Democrat Governors Associations wrote jointly to ask Congress to act immediately on the legislation to provide economic security to the financial system and stabilize the crisis. Congress did act in overwhelming majorities. Almost immediately, however, the Treasury Department deviated from the intent of the program and away from the design they told Congress they would pursue. It did not purchase toxic assets as planned. Instead, the Treasury used TARP funds to take equity stakes in over 300 of our nation's financial institutions. The program was further expanded to non-financial companies, pouring billions into AIG, GM, and Chrysler. When the administration asked for the second tranche of $350 billion, I said no, and so did many of my colleagues. We have especially seen the misuse of TARP in the capital repayments to the Treasury. Since the program began, the Treasury has received over $165 billion in paybacks with interest. Under the Stabilization Act, proceeds from these paybacks were meant to be used to pay down our national debt. That was a key condition to its approval. In a hearing last November, before the Banking Committee, of which I am a member, I spoke with the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Herb Allison, regarding the state of the TARP program 1 year later. Secretary Allison told us that these repaid funds go directly into the general account of the U.S. Treasury to reduce the Treasury's funding need, to reduce our debt. Yet, when I asked him to confirm that the money repaid was no longer part of the total authorization of $700 billion, Secretary Allison said that when TARP funds are repaid, headroom is created within the program to provide additional commitments to maintain the $700 billion funding level. Thus, as the Treasury puts repaid funds back into one pot, it reaches into another for more. basically recycling the $700 billion. This is not what was promised. It is not what was passed. It is not what was envisioned. And I most certainly never voted to authorize a revolving fund to allow the Treasury to remain in our economy definitely. I didn't even vote for $350 billion of this $700 billion that is now becoming a revolving fund. According to the most recent TARP report from the Office of Financial Stability, approximately $545 billion in TARP funds have been committed. Repayments through TARP were over $165 billion. This leaves roughly, with the amount of the 545 which has been paid out, which is about 374. Bottom line is there's roughly $319 billion of unobligated TARP funds. TARP Authority. The recent report issued by the Congressional Oversight Panel for TARP stated that although TARP Authority ends October 3rd, 2010, any funds committed by that date but not yet spent can still be spent under TARP past the deadline. This could create an indefinite time period for expenditures through TARP. The amendment offered by Senator Thune and me and many others would allow us to truly put an end to TARP expansions, and it would put an end immediately, and it would show taxpayers that Congress finally gets it, that we are serious about reducing our nation's skyrocketing debt. This would indeed be the first step for putting our financial house in order. We today can begin the process of lowering this huge debt that our country, just in the last year, has increased exponentially. We are looking at a bill that would increase our debt to $14 trillion. If we pass the amendment that is before us today, we can cut that back instead of adding to the debt. And that is what we ought to do. And while we're at it, Madam President, we need to stop the spending binge that we are on. We need to stop the stimulus package, whatever is not authorized, because that, too, will add to our debt. And we need to recommit to cut taxes. We need to say our financial house must get in order. It is time to reauthorize the tax cuts that were put in place that caused our financial stability after 9/11.